I sensed a growing tension within me. I didn't fight it. A genuine tale of betrayal. I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, hitched to my college sweetheart, Ethan, leading a serene life in Asheville, North Carolina. I believed I had everything. But one evening, a brief encounter with my husband's closest friend altered everything, pulling me towards a temptation I'd never experienced before. For 7 years, I've been wed to Ethan, a compassionate graphic designer who fills our small craftsman bungalow in Asheville, North Carolina, with warmth and laughter. Our home, tucked in the Blue Ridge Mountains, is a sanctuary of exposed beams, local art, and the aroma of cedar from the nearby forests. I work as a freelance illustrator, drawing scenes of Asheville's lively streets and misty peaks from our sunlit kitchen. Life was predictable, comfortable, until one night, a moment so subtle it barely registered, changed everything. It was a crisp October evening, the kind where the mountain air carries the promise of fall. Ethan had stepped out to grab groceries from the co-op on Biltmore Avenue, leaving me alone in the house, a rare treat. I stood at the sink, washing dishes under the glow of a pendant light, the warm, soapy water soothing my hands. The kitchen was my sanctuary, with its butcher block counters and jars of local honey lining the shelves. Outside, the streetlights cast a golden haze on the wet pavement, and the distant hum of Asheville's nightlife, buskers on Haywood Street. The clink of craft beer glasses reminded me of the city's pulse. I loved these moments of solitude when the house was mine. No TV blaring, no Ethan humming off key, just the rhythmic scrub of dishes and the steady trickle of water. I sighed, letting the warmth seep into my fingers, easing the day's aches. My movements were almost meditative. Scrub, rinse, stack, repeat. Through the window, I watched leaves skitter across the lawn, caught in the mountain breeze. I closed my eyes, savoring the silence, unaware that it was about to shatter. A chill crept down my spine, sudden and sharp. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard footsteps, but I felt it, a presence behind me. My body stiffened, the plate in my hand slick with soap. A faint scent hit me. Cedar and leather, unmistakably familiar. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Marcus Hayes, Ethan's best friend since their days at UNC Asheville, a 34-year-old brewery manager with a quiet intensity that always set me on edge. My breath caught, and I gripped the plate tighter, trying to steady myself. Why was he here? Marcus often stopped by, usually with Ethan for game nights or to sample his latest craft brew. But tonight, unannounced, standing so close I could feel the warmth of his body, he was different. I forced my voice to stay calm. Marcus, what are you doing here? A low chuckle brushed the back of my neck, sending a shiver through me. Just checking on you, he said, his voice soft but heavy with something I couldn't place. I kept washing dishes, pretending his presence didn't unsettle me, but the silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. His eyes, I didn't look, but I felt them sharp and unyielding, tracing my movements. You're awfully quiet for someone who just walked in, I said, my tone light but strained. Didn't want to disturb you, he replied, a hint of sarcasm curling his words. I bit my lip, gripping the sink's edge. The water's warmth no longer comforting. Marcus shifted, closing the distance between us. I turned my head slightly, catching his reflection in the window. Tall, muscular, his dark eyes locked on me under the kitchen's pale light. A slow smirk tugged at his lips as if he knew something I didn't. My stomach twisted, a warning bell ringing in my mind. Where's Ethan? I asked, trying to sound casual. Still at the store, he said, shrugging. Thought you might need company. The words were innocent, but his tone wasn't. It was deliberate, testing, like he was waiting for my reaction. I swallowed, forcing a smile. I'm fine, just cleaning up. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his gaze never wavering. You work too hard, Sarah, he said, his voice low, almost intimate. I froze, the dish in my hand forgotten. Someone's got to do it, I replied, but my voice faltered. He tilted his head, his eyes tracing my face, assessing. Ethan doesn't appreciate you enough, The words hit like a stone, rippling through the quiet. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. What? He didn't answer, just held my gaze, his expression unreadable but piercing. The air thickened, the boundary between us fraying. I turned back to the sink, scrubbing harder, trying to drown out the tension coiling in my chest. Marcus didn't move, but I felt him there, his presence I couldn't shake. You should stop, he said suddenly, his voice slow, deliberate. Stop what? I asked, my voice sharper than intended. He didn't reply, but I felt his eyes on the back of my neck lingering. Then, abruptly, he stepped back. See you later, he said, his tone flat. I heard his footsteps, the front door closing softly. I exhaled, my hands trembling as I stared at the running water, the ghost of his presence lingering. The night Marcus stood behind me in the kitchen left a mark I couldn't erase. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment of discomfort, a misunderstanding. But the memory of his cedar and leather scent, the weight of his gaze lingered like a shadow. I was Sarah Mitchell, 32, married to Ethan, living a quiet life in Asheville, North Carolina. I wasn't the kind of woman to let a fleeting encounter unravel her. Yet, as the days passed, I felt the ground shifting beneath me, a subtle tremor threatening the stability I'd built. Asheville buzzed with its autumn charm, leaf peepers flooding the Blue Ridge Parkway, the smell of roasted chestnuts wafting from downtown festivals. I threw myself into my routine, sketching illustrations for a local coffee shop's menu, tending to the herb garden in our backyard, and hosting game nights with Ethan's friends. But every time I stood at the sink, the kitchen felt smaller, as if Marcus's presence had left an imprint on the air. I'd catch myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see his reflection. Ethan noticed nothing, his cheerful obliviousness both a comfort and a pang. He'd come home from his design studio, arms full of groceries or takeout from 12 Bones Smokehouse, and fill the house with stories about his latest project. I'd smile, nod, and laugh at his jokes. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying Marcus's words. Ethan doesn't appreciate you enough. They stung, not because they were true. Ethan was attentive, loving, but because they'd come from Marcus, someone whose quiet intensity made me question myself. A week later, Marcus stopped by again, this time with Ethan home. They sprawled on the couch, debating the merits of IPAs versus stouts while I chopped vegetables for dinner. The normality should have reassured me, but Marcus's presence set my nerves on edge. His dark eyes flicked toward me occasionally, a fleeting glance that felt like a secret. I focused on the rhythm of the knife, the crunch of carrots, trying to anchor myself in the familiar. After dinner, Ethan stepped outside to take a call, leaving me alone with Marcus in the living room. He stood by the fireplace, studying a framed sketch I'd done of Mount Pisgah. You're talented, Sarah, he said, his voice low. I shrugged, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Just a hobby. He turned, his gaze steady. You don't give yourself enough credit. The air shifted, the same heavy silence from that night creeping in. I busied myself stacking plates, avoiding his eyes. You didn't have to come back that night, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough that I felt the warmth of his presence. I wanted to, he said simply, his tone carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. My heart raced, a mix of fear and something I didn't want to name. Marcus, you can't just... I started, but the sound of Ethan's footsteps on the porch cut me off. Marcus stepped back, his expression unreadable as Ethan burst in oblivious, talking about a client's ridiculous demands. I forced a smile, my hands trembling as I carried the plates to the kitchen. That night, as I lay beside Ethan, his steady breathing a contrast to my racing thoughts, I realized I was losing control. Marcus wasn't just Ethan's friend anymore. He was a question I didn't know how to answer. The next day, I confided in my friend Leia, a barista at a downtown cafe who'd known me since college. Over lattes at Double D's Coffee, I skirted the details, but admitted I felt unsettled. It's like I'm not myself, I said, stirring my drink. Leia's eyes softened. You're allowed to feel off, Sarah, but don't let it pull you somewhere you don't want to go. Her words were a lifeline, but they also sharpened my guilt, reminding me of the stakes: my marriage, my home, my sense of self. I resolved to keep Marcus at a distance to reclaim the quiet comfort of my life. But the next time he came by with Ethan at a concert, I opened the door, my resolve crumbling under his steady gaze. We talked about Asheville's winter market, the new bookstore downtown, but the undercurrent was there, pulling me toward him. When he reached for his coat, his hand grazed mine and I froze, the touch sending a shiver through me. "Be careful, Sarah," he said, his voice a warning and a promise. I nodded, unable to speak, knowing I was dancing on the edge of something I couldn't control. December brought a chill to Asheville. The Blue Ridge Mountains cloaked in frost and the promise of snow. The city sparkled with holiday lights from the Biltmore Estate's grand displays to the twinkling strands on Patton Avenue. But inside our bungalow, I was unraveling. Marcus Hayes' presence had become a fire I couldn't extinguish, each encounter stoking a longing that threatened to consume me. Yet one snowy night, the tension between Marcus and me reached a breaking point, forcing me to face the truth I'd been avoiding. I tried to outrun my thoughts, filling my days with distractions. I painted holiday cards for clients, strung lights on our porch, and joined Ethan for caroling at Grove Arcade. But Marcus was a constant shadow, his dark eyes haunting me even when he wasn't there. I'd feel him in the kitchen, the memory of his cedar scent lingering like a stain. Ethan, bless him, remained oblivious, planning a Christmas party with Marcus and their friends, his trust in us both unshaken. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Marcus stopped by unannounced. Ethan was at a late meeting, and I was alone, wrapping gifts in the living room, the fireplace crackling. Marcus knocked, holding a bottle of his brewery's winter ale. "Thought you might like this," he said, his voice warm but edged with something darker. I let him in, my heart pounding, telling myself it was just a quick visit. We sat by the fire, the glow casting shadows on his face. He talked about his plans for the brewery, but his eyes kept finding mine, searching. "You're different lately, Sarah," he said, his voice low, distant. I swallowed, clutching my mug. "I'm just busy," I lied. He leaned closer, his hand resting on the arm of my chair, close enough to feel his warmth. "You don't have to hide from me," he said, his tone a mix of challenge and invitation. The air thickened, the silence heavy with what we wouldn't say. I stood, moving to the kitchen to escape, but he followed, his presence inescapable. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You feel it too, don't you?" My breath caught, the truth I'd buried rising to the surface. "Marcus, we can't," I said, my voice trembling. "This isn't right." He stepped closer, his hand brushing my arm, a touch so light it burned. "Maybe it is," he murmured, his eyes locked on mine. For a moment I was frozen, caught between fear and desire, his lips hovering dangerously close. Then the sound of Ethan's car in the driveway snapped me back. I pushed Marcus away, my hands shaking. "Go," I said, my voice hard. He hesitated, his gaze dark but unreadable, then slipped out the back door. Seconds later, Ethan walked in, arms full of groceries, smiling. "Hey, babe. Got everything for the party," he said, kissing my cheek. I nodded, forcing a smile, my heart still racing. That night, as I helped Ethan unpack, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Nothing had happened. Not really, but the almost was enough to shatter me. I'd stood on the edge of betrayal, and the guilt was suffocating. I lay awake, Ethan's arm around me, and knew I had to act. I couldn't keep dancing this dance, letting Marcus pull me towards something that would destroy everything I loved. January's cold settled over Asheville. The Blue Ridge Mountains blanketed in snow that softened the city's edges. The holiday lights were gone, replaced by the quiet rhythm of winter. But inside, I was battling a storm no snow could calm. Marcus Hayes' near kiss in our living room had broken something in me, exposing a truth I could no longer deny. I'd let myself feel something for him, something that threatened my marriage to Ethan. The guilt was a constant weight, heavier with each passing day. I'd betrayed Ethan, not with actions, but with thoughts, with moments I'd let linger too long. I threw myself into routine, sketching for a local gallery, shoveling snow from our walkway, baking biscuits for Ethan's breakfast. But every time I stood in the kitchen, I felt Marcus's presence, his touch on my arm, a memory that burned. Ethan, oblivious, planned a ski trip to Beach Mountain. His trust in me unshaken, which only deepened my shame. Marcus didn't stop coming by, but his visits were different now, cautious, polite, as if he sensed the line we'd nearly crossed. He'd drop off a new beer or join Ethan for football, but his eyes avoided mine, the tension replaced by a strained distance. I hated it, this awkward formality, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't trust myself around him. Not after that night. I confided in Leia again, meeting her at a cafe on Wall Street. I almost ruined everything, I said, my voice breaking. You stopped it, Sarah, she said firmly. Now protect what matters. Her words gave me strength, but they also forced me to confront the root of my feelings. Loneliness, not in my marriage, but in myself. I'd let Marcus fill a void I hadn't acknowledged. A need for validation I hadn't sought from Ethan. I decided to talk to Marcus to set clear boundaries and end this dangerous pull. One snowy afternoon, he stopped by while Ethan was at the gym. I was alone folding laundry in the living room, the fireplace glowing. Marcus, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. He nodded, his expression guarded, and sat across from me. What happened that night? It can't happen again, I said. I love Ethan, and whatever this is, it's not fair to him or us. His eyes darkened, but he nodded. I know, he said softly. I didn't mean to push you there. I'm sorry. The apology was genuine, but it didn't erase the ache in my chest. I need you to give me space, I said, my throat tight. No more dropping by alone. He looked at me, his jaw tight, then nodded again. Okay, Sarah, I'll respect that. We sat in silence, the fire crackling, the weight of our decisions settling over us. When he left, I stood at the window, watching his truck disappear into the snow, a mix of relief and loss washing over me. That night, I told Ethan I'd been feeling off, not about Marcus, but about needing to reconnect. He listened, his eyes soft, and suggested a weekend getaway to Black Mountain. I nodded, tears prickling, grateful for his love, his trust. I'd come so close to losing it, but I'd pulled back, and now I had to rebuild, to find my way back to the woman I wanted to be. As spring crept into Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains bloomed with dogwoods and azaleas, the air heavy with the promise of renewal. The city came alive with festivals, buskers on Pritchard Park, artisans at the River Arts District. But I was focused inward, rebuilding the life I'd nearly lost. Setting boundaries with Marcus Hayes had left an ache, but it had also given me clarity, a chance to heal the loneliness I'd let fester and rediscover the strength within me. The weeks after our conversation were a mix of relief and adjustment. Marcus respected my request, his visits limited to group settings with Ethan, his presence polite but distant. I'd see him at trivia nights or barbecues, his dark eyes meeting mine briefly, not acknowledging our shared secret. It hurt, losing the ease we'd once had, but it was necessary. I threw myself into my art, painting vibrant scenes of Asheville's skyline for a local gallery, each brushstroke a step toward reclaiming myself. Ethan and I grew closer. The getaway to Black Mountain, a turning point. We hiked trails, laughed over diner breakfasts, and talked about our future. Maybe a family, maybe a bigger house. I opened up about my struggles, not mentioning Marcus, but sharing my need to feel connected. Ethan listened, his hand in mine, and I felt the weight of guilt lift, replaced by gratitude for the life we'd built. Our bungalow, with its cedar scent and mountain views, became a sanctuary again, a place to heal. I leaned on Leia too, joining her for yoga classes at a studio on Lexington Avenue. The stretches and deep breaths helped me process the turmoil, grounding me in my body and my choices. You're stronger than you know, Laya said one day, sipping kombucha after class. I smiled, believing it for the first time in months. I started a journal writing about my fears, my love for Ethan, and the lessons I'd learned about vulnerability and trust. Asheville's spring festivals offered new distractions. I volunteered at a community garden, planting tomatoes and herbs with neighbors. The soil under my nails a reminder of growth. I joined a book club discussing novels over wine at Battery Park Book Exchange, finding solace in shared stories. These connections, small but meaningful, filled the void I'd once let Marcus occupy, showing me I didn't need him to feel seen. One evening, as I painted in the kitchen, the setting sun casting a golden glow, I reflected on the journey. Marcus had been a mirror reflecting my own unmet needs, but he wasn't the answer. My strength came from within, from the love I shared with Ethan, from the community I'd built in Asheville. I wrote a letter to myself, not to send, but to affirm my commitment to my marriage, my art, my life. At a spring barbecue, Marcus was there laughing with Ethan by the grill. I watched from the porch, a glass of sweet tea in hand, and felt a quiet peace. He was part of our world, but no longer a threat. When our eyes met, I smiled, a gesture of closure, and he nodded, understanding. As the Blue Ridge Mountains glowed in the distance, I knew I'd found my way back. Not to the woman I was, but to the woman I was becoming, stronger for the choices I'd made. This is my story of facing temptation, fighting sin, and finding my way back to a life I love. Thank you for listening. What did you think of my journey? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was I right to set those boundaries, or did I miss out on an opportunity to do more? Click the bell so you don't miss the next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.